Well, one of the most delightful artifacts from the late Puritan era, really the early 18th century, is the diary of Sarah Kemble Knight. And it's fairly extensive. We only have a little bit of a slice of it here, but it does give us, speaking of slices, a slice of early 18th century life in New England, actually New England and New York. And, she's got quite a bit of material, but this excerpt deals primarily with her travel on business from Boston to New York, and it gives you an opportunity because it's such a lovely, vivid, literate, and funny document to find out a lot about who was living in that part of the colonies at the time. A little cross section of the different kinds of people you might run into, what an upper class lady thought of lower class or working class people. Uh, it really is kind of a fascinating sort of priceless piece because it tells us a lot. I think next to de Tocqueville, this is probably one of the most vivid depictions of early American life that exists. Sarah Kemble Knight was well, I suppose by today's standards, a well-off businesswoman with serious business affairs. I wouldn't say she was fabulously wealthy, but she and her husband did quite well. And that was what brought her on her way from Boston to New York by various means of conveyance, it might be added. Carriages and horseback and even canoe at one point. Quite a fascinating thing. We'll start off taking a look at a few of the passages here because I think they're quite instructive, beginning on page 427 here, when she talks about checking into her first sort of hotel, if you want to call it that. Frankly, the inns in most towns were largely taverns with a place upstairs where you could just kind of crash in a small, dirty, scratchy bed that you frequently had to share with other guests you didn't even know. Um, and so that was common in the early days. You just kind of people knew of people's taverns or houses or public houses, and whoever you hired to help bring you from one point to another would let you know where you would go. You would frequently get pretty much ripped off with lousy food and lousy drink and an uncomfortable bed. Maybe get a few bed bugs and fleas on the way. So this was hardly the Hyatt Regency at all, and so she's quite entertaining as she goes into her encounters with these people. Lucky for us, she evidently kept a great journal and wrote her thoughts down every day. If you'll look over on page 427, when he checks into Billings, we come to Billings, where I was to lodge. My guide dismounted and very complacently helped me down. Her guide's not a real helpful guy. He's basically just interested in having a beer and chewing tobacco or smoking or whatever he does with it. But on 427, he says that the innkeeper's eldest daughter of the family, with these or two or words to the purpose, she says, viz., "Law for me, what in the world brings you here at this time of night? I never see a woman on the road so dreadful late in all the days of my versatile life. Who are you? Where are you going? I'm scared out of my wits." How much, with much now of the same kind, I stood aghast. Right? This woman's just chattering away, peppering her with questions, and she says, "I stood aghast." It's like, "Guh, I'm overwhelmed here." Preparing to reply, when in comes my guide. To him, Madam turned, roaring out, "Lawful heart, John, is it you? Howdy do. Where in the world are you going with this woman? Who is she?" John made no answer, but sat down in the corner, and he begins to fumble with his tobacco, I suppose. I told her she treated me very rudely, and I did not think it my duty to answer her unmannerly questions. But to get rid of them, I told her to come there to have the posts. I come there to have the post's company with me tomorrow on my journey. And then she does something interesting. So in other words, Sarah Kemble Knight puts her in her place and says, do not speak to a lady with firing off questions and loud voices and things like this. She knew that she was an upper class woman, and that this innkeeper's eldest daughter had no business questioning her like that. Didn't treat her with the proper dignity and respect that she was due to her station. Suddenly, though, here's an interesting little tidbit that she says. And then she run upstairs and puts on 2 or 3 rings, or else I hadn't seen them before, and returning set herself just before me, showing the way to Reading, that I might see her ornaments, perhaps to gain the more respect. In other words, whoever this woman was, she ran upstairs, put a few rings on, comes downstairs and points this way, that way to Reading, etc., just so you can see that she's got rings and therefore she's not lower class either, as if to sort of show Sarah Kemble Knight, I'm a person of property as well. It's quite curious. She says, well, maybe I didn't see him the first time, but yeah, she sure did make a big show of showing me the rings on her fingers. I'm no servant, etc. She talks about how bad the food is. She says, what cabbage I swallowed served for a cud the whole day afterwards. She was burping it up the next day all day. Delightful combination of A, upper class breeding on her part, but B, she's quite fluent and able to sort of swim with the lower class fishes all day. I mean, she doesn't, she doesn't shy away from them. She knows she's got to deal with them. Her world is filled with lower class people, working class people, people who are really rough around the edges. Doesn't mean she's going to compromise her mannerisms, but she sure does think that they're an awful lot to have to put up with. Sometimes she thinks they're pretty funny, though. So you get a chance to kind of see from, you could call it a snobbish perspective, what it's like to be an upper class person with all these ruffians a little bit. On page 428, she starts talking about being in the canoe, and she says, I didn't even dare to move my tongue to one side of my mouth or the other for fear of getting off balance and tipping that sucker over. It was the scariest thing she'd ever done. I'm sure she did it in petticoats and everything. On 429, one of the things that I think is really interesting is, despite the fact that this woman was constantly surrounded by lower class people, as I said earlier, she's a person of education and high breeding, and she finds writing her own poetry something that is a terrific pastime for her, something she deeply enjoys. And her poem to Fair Cynthia, basically the moon, on a moonlit night, is actually pretty good for something she just kind of rattles off in her journal one night before falling to sleep. Fair Cynthia, all the homage that I may pay unto a creature, unto thee I pay. Look at the restraint there on the part of the still Puritan woman. All the homage that I may unto a creature, unto thee I pay. Right? What's appropriate? Not I wouldn't praise you the way a pagan would, like a god. Right? So she writes a poem purely for her personal enjoyment, which shows how educated she is. It's quite a good poem, actually. On the bottom of page 430. Then we get the story of the drunkards. She's staying at another inn, and some people are staying up all night, and they are really tying one on. Clamor of some of the town toppers in the next room, who were entered into a strong debate concerning the signification of the name of their country, Narragansett. One said it was named so by the Indians, because there grew a briar there of a prodigious height and bigness, the like hardly ever known, called by the Indians the Narragansetts, right? So there's a drunken debate going on in the room next door, and she's about had enough of it. By page 431, she says, I set my candle on a chest by the bedside, and setting up, fell to my old way of composing my resentments in the following manner. And she writes a poem. So here she's dealing with these rough drinkers next door, low-class guys, and she's going to write a poem about this. And she writes it's an ode to rum. I ask thy aid, O potent rum, to charm these wrangling toppers dumb. Thou hast their giddy brains possess, the man confounded with the beast, should be best, and I, poor I, could get no rest. Intoxicate them with thy fumes, oh, still their tongues till morning comes. Right? Look, hey, rum, you got 'em drunk. Please put 'em to bed. It's a pretty good little poem. And I know not, but my wishes took effect, for the dispute soon ended with t'other dram, and so good night. Right? So she's got a lot of patience for drunken dudes next door who argue. Oh, please, rum, you started this drunken argument. Please end it by putting them to sleep. But the post encouraged me, she says. She goes, this is very interesting. She runs across a fellow named Mr. DeVille's. We'll see what she does with the name. But the post encouraged me by saying we should be well accommodated anon at Mr. Devilles a few miles further. But I question whether we ought to go to the devil to be helped out of affliction. Right, Mr. Deville. I don't know if I want to stay at that guy's place. However, like the rest of the deluded souls that post to the infernal den, we made all possible speed to this devil's habitation, where, alighting in full assurance of good accommodation, we were going in. But meeting his two daughters, right? We rushed on to hell like all the other damn souls. But meeting his two daughters when they get ready to check in, as I suppose twins, they so nearly resembled each other, both in features and habit, and looked as old as the devil himself and quite as ugly. We desired entertainment, but they could hardly get a word out of them, till with our importunity telling them our necessity, etc., they called the old sophister, who was as sparing of his words as his daughters had been, and no or none was the reply he made to our demands. He differed only in this from the odd fellow in the other country. He let us depart. In other words, it was, is there no entertainment tonight at dinner time? No one's going to sing? No one's going to play an instrument? Nope. Just him and his two really, really, really ugly twin daughters, who also didn't talk much. So she goes on with a number of different things, and the poems are quite interesting and everything. I will say, to be fair, on page 436, for example, you can go on with this forever, we won't, but on page 437, she says, just before joining hands, the bridegroom quits the place, who is soon followed by the bridesmen, and it is dragged back to duty, being the reverse, the former practice among us, to steal most pride. She talks about some of the customs and traditions in the area. Now, this is quite interesting too, which isn't really a very flattering portrayal of her. Remember, she is who she is. She's a product of the age, and this is the way upper class people thought. She's talking about different traditions and customs and practices and manners, correct, in different areas, and she's quite appalled at the fact that some people allow their slaves to eat dinner with them. And she says, but too indulgent, especially the farmers, to their slaves. They're too indulgent, she thinks, in this area. Suffering too great familiarity from them, permitting them to sit at table and eat with them, as they say, to save time. Right? Well, I let my slaves eat dinner with me because it saves time. And into the dish goes the black hoof as freely as the white hand. The black hoof, right? As though slaves, African American slaves, are devils. Not a very flattering thing for her to reveal that she feels that way, and so on. So a lot of things in here, but what it's designed to do is really kind of look at the wonderful, vivid use of language. She's quite, especially when she talks about tobacco and their use of tobacco and all of these sorts of things. Bumpkin simpers, cries its confounded gay, I vow, and beckoning to the door, in comes Joan Tawdry, dropping about 50 curtsies, and stands by him. How awkward some of these people are. Her depictions of them are very, very vivid, and she sees them as being sort of awkward, but some of them rather admirable. She's laughing up her sleeve at some of them. She's irritated by others. But others she has some degree of admiration for, since they're very hardworking and honest people. So a wonderful piece here. If you get a chance, you should read the entire text, because it's a book-length piece. We don't have that kind of time for now. But it gives us a chance to kind of look at the fact that Puritan society was changing. It was becoming considerably more stratified. That's the thing to walk away from with this, more stratified. And as new immigrants who were non-Puritans were coming in, those who had Puritan blue blood considered themselves socially superior to these immigrants, these riffraff people, these low-class, uneducated people who were moving into the colonies from everywhere, England, Germany, France, the Netherlands, all over the place by this time. So an interesting thing to keep our eye out on.